The American Midwest is often described as predictable. Endless fields, quiet towns, and if you live here or if you've been here before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Where you look out over the landscape and see wave after wave of corn rows, bean fields, sunflowers, and on and on. Long roads stretching just over the horizon that never seem to end. But beneath the surface are stories. Stories whispered at county fairs, around campfires, and across diner counters at 2 a.m. Stories that shouldn't even exist, creatures seen only for a moment, shapes lurking where they don't belong. And tonight we're headed to central Kansas to explore one of the strangest cryptid legends in the Midwest. A creature with a simple name. A funny name, actually, but a name that has lasted decades. This is the story of Sinkhole Sam. Welcome to Midwest Small Town. I'm Dan, your host and Midwest Small Town storyteller. And before I go too much further into this episode, just want to give you a quick heads up that we are changing our format with our podcast just to get into more stories and tell the stories of small towns across the Midwest and maybe even a little further yet. But stories that are pretty amazing stories, actually. And I love telling them. Every town that I've been to and I visit seems to have a story. And so I want to make sure that we're giving those stories to you. And of course, tonight we're traveling to the small community of Inman, Kansas, population of roughly 2,900, where residents have spent generations telling stories about something living in the depths of a mysterious water-filled sinkhole. Now, I'll tell you that this story, tongue-in-cheek, is a funny one with folklore, but also had some people kind of sitting on their edge of their seats back in the 1950s and a little bit earlier than that, and we'll get into that. But as it turns out, it's something enormous in this sinkhole, almost eel-like, something that many witnesses insist was very, very real. Before we begin the story, let's talk about Inman, Kansas, a small town that sits in McPherson County, and at first glance, the landscape doesn't seem overly mysterious. The farmland dominates the regions, wheat fields sway in the wind, roads cut across the countryside, and it feels pretty Midwest. But there seems to be a couple things with the geology in the area that become noticeable. Sinkholes. Natural depressions formed underground when rocks dissolve or collapse, and some become surprisingly deep, and many of these sinkholes fill with water. And water, especially deep water, has always been fertile ground for legends. Humans have a tendency to imagine these monsters in places where often we can't see the bottom. Lakes, rivers, caves, and of course, sinkholes. Because once the water becomes dark enough, muddy enough, murky enough, anything could be in that water. And that's precisely what brings us to Inman, Kansas, because in the late 20th century, one particular sinkhole began attracting attention, and it wasn't because of the size or history of the sinkhole, but because people started claiming that something lived there. And this something was big. Very big. It was the 1920s. The fishermen began reporting strange sightings and seeing things that were too huge to be a catfish. But they said whatever it was serpent-like. It appeared to be 15 feet long and as wide as a tire. Some had reported that it had 2 tail fins, like a whale or walrus, and others claimed that it appeared to smile as it turned and swam around the sinkhole. And although the legend never really went away, the story seemed to almost fade for some time, until 1952. 2 Mennonite farm boys were fishing near the sinkhole when suddenly they spotted this large snake-like creature swimming in the hole. They described it as 15 to 30 feet long and as wide as a tire, around 21 inches thick, they thought. It was also described to have a fluted tail, much like a walrus, a long fin on its back, and a non-snake-like grin, seeming to smile at its onlookers. The two boys, Albert Neufeld and George Rager, could hardly believe their eyes. They had never seen such a huge snake-like creature in all their lives. And without hesitation, Neufeld got out his .22 hunting rifle, took aim at the creature, and fired 2 shots, which did nothing to the monster. It simply continued swimming, and after being startled by the shots, dove quickly in the dark waters of the hole and disappeared. Rager admitted later he thought they had killed the giant snake monster, but revealed he saw it again swimming around the sinkhole later. And that's when the madness began. Now, it's not every day that a giant cryptid snake is discovered in your town, and Inman was a small town. At that time, population was around 500, and in small towns, news travels fast, especially when there's a monster swimming nearby. Reports spread and theories began to pop up. Inman had a sinkhole creature. Inman had a Loch Ness monster. Was it a snake, or was it a worm-like creature? People speculated, and the story of the sinkhole monster grew. Some even theorized that it wasn't even a snake at all, but more in line with a giant worm. Soon, these stories began to spread. The giant worm monster was given a name: Sinkhole Sam. And from here, the legend grew. The story began to spread like wildfire, and soon a skeptical Kansas newspaper columnist, Ernest Dewey, caught wind of the story and traveled to Inman. Dewey was no stranger to weird stories. He had started his career publishing articles about the traveling circus and naturally had a knack for writing stories that made fun of local legends and attached goofy names, like the story of the Kansas dragon, called Balltail Snicklehoopus, and many more. But after investigating Sinkhole Sam, he published a story in the Salina Journal Sunday that he had ventured to Inman, found the sinkhole, and in the process of investigating brought along a sidekick and friend, Dr. Erasmus Quattlebaum, who was a fictional character used by Dewey to poke fun of the legend. Quattlebaum made the assessment that the monster of the sinkhole wasn't a monster at all, but a forgotten extinct worm-like creature known as the Ferpengurkle, and was known to inhabit the Kansas caverns underground because naturally no creature would inhabit a waterhole only 15 feet deep. It wasn't big enough. So in fact, Sinkhole Sam wasn't a natural resident. He was merely visiting from below and using it as an above-the-ground swimming pool. Dewey went on in his article explaining that residents had nothing to fear because, after all, Ferpengurkles were terribly dumb and vegetarian. And the article went out, and Kansas residents read the article, and soon the intrigue was on. Monster hunters and curious people from all over began to make their way to the sinkhole, all in the hopes of at least catching a glimpse of Sinkhole Sam, and maybe catching the creature to prove once and for all there was indeed a giant worm or snake inhabiting the Inman, Kansas area. But the legend of Sinkhole Sam continues right after this. Hi there, Dan here with Midwest Small Town. Do you like stories of small towns, legends, little folklore stories, stories about places to visit, or even stories that have passed generations about Midwest towns? And for the most part, we stick to the Midwest, which has its fair share of endless stories, but that's where you come in as a listener. First off, thank you for following along. We look at ourselves as more of a community here than just some random podcast or a Facebook channel or a YouTube channel. You can find us on several platforms doing videos and podcasting, and I love hearing from each and one of you, especially if you have a story of your own to share, or maybe even a story that you would like me to just get into. And we can certainly do that. You can drop me a line here in the comments. Consider subscribing and following along. And if you like what you hear, can you do me a favor? Could you consider giving me a 5-star review? The comments and reviews really help. And of course, I'll give you credit in the podcast for the suggestions. Plenty more stories coming up, including on our next episode, where we travel back to Kansas to tell you the story of the largest ball of twine. Something that sounds kind of funny, but is quite the spectacle with a story to go with it. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. So one theory that was mentioned earlier was the thought that it might be a Mongolian death worm. Now, what the heck is that? Well, according to Wikipedia, it's a large worm that exists in the Gobi Desert. So how big are we talking here? They say between 2 and 5 feet long. And in the book On the Trail of Ancient Man, author Roy Chapman Andrews wrote, "It is shaped like a sausage about 2 feet long, has no head nor leg, and it is so poisonous that merely touching it means instant death." And there's more. According to author Ivan McCurley, he describes the worm as traveling underground, creating waves of sand as it surfaces, and it could kill at a distance either by spraying a venom or by means of an electric discharge. So we have a large worm. It lives underground, it's poisonous, it shoots venom or electrical discharges, and this is the Mongolian death worm. Now, it's important to note the authors never saw the worm, and even though Mongolian officials firmly believed in its existence, there was little proof, and even Roy Chapman Andrews doubted its existence. And I can't help but think of the book or the movie Dune when I think of these Mongolian death worms, but here we are in Kansas, and Sinkhole Sam is possibly being described as a Mongolian death worm. After the sighting in 1952, Mel Pinner, who farmed the land around the sinkhole, reported that he was coming home one afternoon and saw dozens of cars parked around the sinkhole. The crowds were gathering, all in hopes to catch a glimpse of the Ferpengurkle. And naturally, just as precaution, they all had their windows rolled up just in case. The wildfire of folklore and stories of the creature began to spread even further. And soon a reporter from Kansas City came wandering on the scene, and her name was Mary Kay Flynn. And she began gathering more stories and more accounts from people that it was a 15-long creature, but nobody knew what it really was. Soon more papers began to run the story from Oregon to Florida, and now Inman, Kansas was on the map. But here's the thing. Nobody saw Sinkhole Sam ever again. Where was he? Was it a hoax? Some made-up story to draw tourism? Was it the wild imagination by a couple of teens out fishing one day only to have seen maybe a giant catfish? Or maybe it was a large snake. One person suggested that it was possibly a gopher snake. A theory quite possible, as gopher snakes can grow to be quite large, 89 inches to be exact. But here's the thing. Mennonites as a whole are not known to really exaggerate, especially when it puts the spotlight on them. They don't want to have much attention on them, especially with something that appears to be a tall tale. It's reported that George Rager's family wanted the story to just disappear. They were embarrassed, and yet Albert Newfield, the .22 rifle shooting bandit, that's what I call him here, who took aim and either missed or never even affected Sinkhole Sam, well, he relished telling the story. The story would be told again and again, and of course, like any wild fishing tale, Sinkhole Sam got bigger and bigger. And one day, it seemed to just disappear overnight, until stories of a creature emerging from the depths of Inman County State Lake, further south, began to surface. Just when the legend of Sinkhole Sam was beginning to disappear, there was a report south of Inman, in Kingman, Kansas, about a 20-foot animal that was as big as round as a man that emerged from the lake, attacked a calf, and dragged it into the lake. Was it Sam? If it was, so much for being a vegetarian. Reports began to run crazy in the late 60s of a monster lurking in the depths of Kingman County State Lake, which again is about 50 miles south of Inman, and locals began organizing hunting parties to track the creature down. Dr. N.E. Allison was a noted person around Kingman who had enough, organizing the party in August of 1969 with over 750 people joining the hunt. They used horses, professional snake hunters, and 2 planes from the sky, but they never found it. He organized a second one in 1970, and again, the Kingman serpent eluded the hunting party. Speculation began to build that it was a giant serpent around 20 feet long, and more stories of encounters began to come to light. One man claimed he saw it in his pasture and watched it as it slithered into a nearby swamp area. He claimed that it was a little smaller, around 15 feet. And let's be clear, whether 20 or 15 feet, that's a large creature, folks. The man claimed in conclusion that it wasn't the only time he saw it. Then there's the story of the truck driver driving through the area. He reported seeing it slithering across the road and that he nearly hit it but stopped his truck in fear that it would hurt his truck. Then there was the story of a local rancher who was out rounding up cattle on his ranch when the large snake tripped his horse. Theories began to formulate, and soon people began to connect the sinkhole creature of Inman with the giant serpent in Kingman. After all, it was only 50 miles apart. Could it have been Sinkhole Sam? Did Sam tire of his tiny little sinkhole and tire of all the crazy sightseeing people up in Inman and all the gunshots? Did he find a new home? One theory suggests that Sam did indeed change locations, taking underground routes, 50 miles south, leading him to his new home of Kingman Lake. And yet, there are differences. Today, Sinkhole Sam is barely remembered, unless through a story like this one on Midwest Small Town, bringing up the story from the past, a story that labeled Sam as the Kansas cryptid. And it's not only Sam that's been forgotten, but the sinkhole itself barely exists, almost dried up. According to some accounts, barely standing at 5 feet deep in some areas. No signs of fish, no signs of life, and no Sam. Nobody ever found it. Nobody captured a photo or video of it. No true scientific evidence ever proved its true existence, and soon the crowds stopped coming. Newspapers moved to their next story, and Sinkhole Sam just disappeared. Maybe Sam was a monster, maybe an eel or a snake or a giant fish, but maybe Sam was just a ripple of water. And the story grew into legend. And maybe that's the real story, that in Midwest Small Town, USA, it's a place rooted in legends. And somewhere near Inman, Kansas, when everything slows down, the wind dies down, and the water is calm, some people might still wonder what might be lurking just beneath the surface of the sinkhole. Silently waiting, listening, watching, and maybe, just maybe, underneath is that non-snake-like grin smiling back up. You've been listening to the legend of Sinkhole Sam of Inman, Kansas. The show was recorded, edited, and produced by me, myself, and I. This is Dan, your host and Midwest Small Town storyteller. And this is Midwest Small Town.